This excerpt from St. Matthew's Gospel is the conclusion of a section that focuses on the demands of discipleship. Admittedly, if we've listened closely, it's a passage that has the potential to disturb us more than console us, as it doesn't leave us much wiggle room or safe middle ground as true disciples of Jesus. Indeed, when it comes to Jesus' expectations for those who follow him, Jesus doesn't deal in small print. Rather, he makes it clear up front from the start that if anyone wants to follow him, they have to accept that there is a steep price to be paid. What we probably find most concerning is that demand that anyone who wants to follow Jesus must love him even more than the closest members of their own families. Yet as off-putting as that might initially sound to us, on further examination, perhaps Jesus ends up to be quite right. There was perhaps a time in the memory span of many of us here, myself included, before there were 24-hour news cycles or so many social media outlets, a time when people got their information about the world and formed their opinions on issues and their positions on social ethics and morals from the family itself. And so in the past, there tended to be less of a chance of a diverse collection of opinions around any family table as to what is right and wrong, good and best, compared with the present day. Most families were once mostly of the same social class, education level, affiliated with the same religious denomination, and thus they were of similar persuasions, religiously, socially, politically, and morally. But that's not always the case today, and thus conversations at the table for Sunday dinners, or perhaps upcoming 4th of July cookouts, and meals on many other major holidays can now be loaded with landmines of divergent outlook and opinion. So the rule to keep politics and religion out of conversations at family gatherings is often a wise one to prevent tension and preserve the peace. Yet this is actually what Jesus is talking about. He doesn't want us to love family more than him, such that we would feel we should hide our faith in him or fail to speak up and defend his teachings just to preserve family togetherness and harmony as we keep silent. I'm sure many of us have been in this situation at some time or another, but it is always a tense one and thus potentially unpleasant, because most people actually find it hard to calmly agree to disagree with one another. Yet that is how we will most often then be tempted to preserve our own life here by remaining silent and non-controversial. Yet all the while, we may be jeopardizing our integrity by not claiming our affiliation with Jesus or our faithfulness to his teachings. Indeed, in this same chapter earlier, Jesus warns that if any deny him before the world, he will deny them before his Father. While extended family gatherings or other situations are likely settings for the uncomfortable dilemma of having to decide whether to speak up and out and remain faithful or stay silent to remain safe and non-controversial, yet more and more disciples today face similar tensions in the workplace As our cultural norms today continue a slippery slope from faith-based to secular, from moral to immoral, sometimes it is easy to mistakenly think that we are following the gospel by being nice and therefore remaining silent, instead of becoming a nuisance by challenging what is being said that we understand to be clearly wrong. So let us admire those who have great courage, like the postal worker who brought his case as far as the Supreme Court so as not to be forced to work on Sundays, or the bakers or web designers that have said no to designing things that they feel violate their conscience as Christian believers. But where are the voices of Christian parents who so often sit back silently as sports practices are scheduled on Sunday mornings when their children should be with them here in church? In these and so many other situations today, we have the opportunity to stand up and be counted as disciples. But the costs of doing so are usually steep. We risk being called haters. We risk losing status, friends, and some even their jobs. But that is why Jesus tells us quite bluntly that to follow him means to take up the cross. In other words, it will entail sacrifice and it will entail suffering. And so many will walk the other way, thinking that is really way too high a price to pay. Yet that is the path that Jesus himself took, and we should note where that path led, from death to resurrection and life. So when faced with that dilemma, the dilemma of speaking up and out as disciples and defending the gospel and its values or not, though perhaps tempted to preserve our status and stay in our comfort zone, let us heed that warning of Jesus, not to ever be so foolish to preserve what is merely temporary, all the while jeopardizing what is eternal.